Welcome to the Cedarburg Art Museum. The current exhibition celebrates the completion of an important new book, A Creative Place, The History of Wisconsin Art, the first publication to survey the 13,000-year history of art in Wisconsin, and is published by the Cedarburg Art Museum. It elevates art to its rightful place in the proud culture of our state. Primary authors include Tom Litke, a former art instructor, artist, and art museum director, and Anne-Marie Sawkins, a Milwaukee-based curator, art historian, and author. Supporting authors include Melanie Herzog, art historian, editor, and author, Robert Bozart, archaeologist, and Fred Schwartfeger, art essayist. And special thanks to our exhibit sponsors who made this possible: Guardian Fine Art Services, Wilo, Jim and Mal Hepburn, David Harrow and Jay Frankie, the Kohler Foundation, and others. The exhibition is curated by Rick Hartman. It's chronological, like the book. Each of the museum's 7 rooms covers a different period, from prehistoric and native work through the beginning of the 21st century. An audio tour is available which also highlights interesting information and art objects. The first room includes both chapters 1 and 2. As you enter each gallery, you will find a panel that summarizes the chapter. Chapter 1, Native Presence, the Beginning of Art in Wisconsin. With the arrival of the first people 13,000 years ago, the history of art in Wisconsin began. The earliest artistic expression by these inhabitants was driven by need. Most of what remains can be seen only in the ancient stone tools, such as knives, drills, axes, and projectile points. Additional panels talk about the Paleo-Indian period, the Archaic period, the Mississippian period, and the Oneonta culture in Wisconsin. In the display case, you'll see objects from the period, including a copper crescent tool, a large fluted stone axe, beads and a pendant made of shells and stones, a banner stone weight which would have been attached to a spear, and a carved stone disc pipe. As you continue to move to the right around the room, you will find Chapter 2, Encounters and Settlement, Art in Wisconsin, 1634 to 1870. With the arrival of European explorers, missionaries, traders, and soldiers, Wisconsin Native Americans experienced a threatening cultural shift. These visitors and settlers brought materials, technologies, and worldviews that were fundamentally different from those held by Native peoples. In Gallery 2, you will find art objects including an amazing 1849 painting by Alonzo Leach titled The Old Settler, a watercolor from 1863 by Robert Merrill, Civil War Charge, and an early stoneware jar by the Calvin Batchelder Company, and panels that provide more information on the American territorial era, folk and decorative arts, and early Wisconsin statehood. Moving to the next gallery, we enter the mid-1800s to early 1900s. Chapter 3, The Great Cultural Expansion, 1870 to 1918. The post-Civil War years dramatically transformed Wisconsin culturally and economically. Milwaukee's population exploded more than 360%. The arts flourished in Wisconsin, and the impact of German culture was vast. An expanded railroad rapidly transported people and goods, including Wisconsin artists seeking picturesque locales to paint. The Wisconsin Dells, Door County, and Elkhart Lake were popular destinations. Here you can read more about early Wisconsin photography, creativity beyond academic tradition, Wisconsin's labor movement, featuring a Bernard Schneider painting which hangs permanently at the top of the museum staircase, and Milwaukee's panorama painters. Important artworks from this period include The Narrows, an important painting from the Wisconsin Dells by Henry Vianden, referred to as the father of Wisconsin art, a portrait of a young child by Carl von Marr, an oil painting titled View of Island Park by John Waldo, an etching of Jones Island by Frank Enders, a painting of a woman in traditional ethnic attire by Julius Siegel, spectacular early pottery, including a Norse jardiniere and Pauline pottery vase, and an oil painting, An Evening in Milwaukee by Richard Lawrence. We will head across the hall to Chapter 4, Transitioning from European Ideals to America's Regional Interests, 1918 to 1945. Following World War I, the country emerged from the cultural and artistic shadows of Europe. Wisconsin preferred naturalistic art that depicted American life in recognizable locales, known as the American scene. The American scene included several styles. Urban realism focused on middle-class city life. Social realism highlighted the inequities of the Great Depression. Regionalism depicted scenes of farmlands and life in small towns and rural areas. In 1929, the collapse of the economy was particularly threatening to artists. Salvation came in the form of FDR's New Deal. Works of art from the period include a 1938 WPA print by Alfred Sessler titled Pageant Prelude, a large impressionistic painting of Bradford Beach by Francesco Spicuzza, a portrait of a woman by Elsa Ulbricht, a watercolor of the Third Ward Grocery Market by George Raab, a dinner scene titled Quality Lunch by Garrett Sinclair, a large painting of fishermen on Lake Michigan by Robert von Neumann. You will also find a wooden toy truck from Milwaukee's Handicraft project and a pair of calendars featuring prints of original artwork by notable Wisconsin artists. You can read more about social realism in Wisconsin, the Milwaukee Handicraft project during the WPA period, the Art for All approach of the New Deal programs, and Wisconsin's regional art program featuring John Stewart Curry. Time to head upstairs to the second floor for Chapters 5, 6, and 7. Chapter 5, The Post-War Period, 1945 to 1965. Following World War II, changes to the nation's political climate and educational system greatly affected Wisconsin's art scene. Regionalism became less relevant, replaced by anxiety of social conformity, threat of nuclear annihilation, and the escalating Cold War. The GI Bill of Rights provided educational benefits, transforming the lives of millions of veterans. Universities became hubs of artistic activity. The transitional post-war decade witnessed a clash of artistic ideologies, the traditional versus the modern. This room presents Wisconsin's magic realists like John Wildey and Carl Preby, including a wonderful little painting titled Cook's Delight by John Wildey, a glazed stoneware vase by Abe Cohn, a watercolor of the Milwaukee Road by Lawrence Rathsack, a mixed media painting and collage by Ida Ozenoff, Mary Knowles' stoneware three-piece sculpture of children in architecture. You can read more about Wisconsin's artist-built environments and the Kohler Foundation. See an oil painting titled Cathedral by Joseph Freibert, a Trompe-l'oeil painting titled The Announcement by Aaron Bowrod. You can read about early abstract and non-objective painters like Carl Holte and Lucia Stern, with a wonderful mixed media piece by Lucia Stern. And finally, see how art turns toward modernism with examples by Ruth Grotenrath and Schomer Lichtner. Leaving Chapter 5, we exit right around the corner. Chapter 6, Activism and Innovation in the Visual Arts, 1965 to 1980. The 1960s marked a cultural and artistic coming of age. Political turmoil, social movements, and changes in the artistic world profoundly affected art. Wisconsin artists responded by producing art that manifested visions of social transformation, dealing with civil rights, women's rights, environmental activism, the draft, and the Vietnam War. This turbulent period saw an increase in support for the arts locally and nationally. Funding fueled production, bolstering the art market and investments by collectors. Private and corporate support increased for art publications, exhibitions, and artists throughout the state. In this gallery, learn about the rise of African American artists. A dynamically symbolic painting by Gerald Coleman titled Death of the City, and a mixed media piece by Frida High titled Aunt Jemima's Matrilineage. Other works exemplify the studio glass movement, featuring Harvey Littleton and Audrey Handler. a glass sculpture plate of fruit by Handler. See an etching by Arthur Thrall titled Restoration. Gerald Bellin's etching, Velasquez paints the Don Diego de Acedo. Gene Stamstra's impressive sculpture titled Oblio Outpost Overwhelms. Check out the information about artists and activism. Evelyn Patricia Terry's print, The Black Flag, and read about the many different manifestations that sculpture now portrays. Now, down the hall to the last room and final chapter. Chapter 7. The Last 2 Decades of the 20th Century. The last decades of the 20th century were characterized by multiple forms of artistic expression, rather than a distinct style or unified movement. Notable events affecting the arts included the AIDS epidemic, slashing of federal and local art funding, and targeting artists and creative groups with political assaults on contemporary art. White male artists continued to dominate the art world, more exhibitions and reviews by critics. In Wisconsin, female artists sought to raise awareness of gender bias. This gallery features Mary Barrow's mixed media piece, Unveiling Self, Shimon and Lindemann's photograph titled Anne, an untitled oil painting by George Edwards. Quietly Radical, Women Artists Subverting Norms, featuring Janet Roberts' work. Gina Litherland's Damon Rose's Oil on Panel. Reginald Guy's Chemical Scoids. Read more about the new abstraction of the period. See Dellawell's American Nightmares. Discover contemporary studio craft in clay, metal, wood, and fiber, with examples of 3 small ceramic vessels by Sandra Byers. David Holmes' mixed media sculpture titled Bovines for Science. And a remarkable carved wood mixed media sculpture of A Tree Goblet and Bird Nest by eccentrics Tom Rauschke and Karen Wicken. Here a panel describes building for the next century, highlighting Milwaukee's Calatrava-designed Milwaukee Art Museum and Susan Falkman's carved fireplace titled Streaming in the Sharon Lynn Wilson Center for the Arts in Brookfield. Simon Sparrow's untitled mixed media piece with beads and glitter. William Blackman's mixed media painting. A charcoal drawing titled Dizzy by Akinshu dating to 1996. Zero, an aluminum sculpture by John Balsley. And Joanna Pellman's The Reunion, which is a remarkable piece which creates each of the 4 different bug images in a different print process. Discover more about printmaking of the period. And finally, Jan Sayre's mixed media composition titled Driftless. An informational panel presenting Wisconsin's environmental art scene with examples by Roy Staub and Tom Lidke. And finally, Two Bathers, a photographic print by Stephen Foster. Thanks again to our exhibition sponsors for making this show possible. Guardian Fine Art Services, Wilo, Jill and Mal Hepburn, David Harrow and Jay Frankie, the Kohler Foundation, and others. We hope you enjoyed your brief tour and will come see it in person. Please tell your friends, purchase the book, and learn more, because Wisconsin's art history continues to be written every day.